Shamatha can be literally translated as calm abiding. Here's a nice image of a meditator in the middle, abiding calmly, while these two evil scientists have hooked up this person with this very sophisticated scientific gadget with pink elephants, and they're taking meticulous, careful notes about what's going on with this person when this person is meditating. This artwork is by one of the relatives of our research participants. The Shamatha Project is a multi-year, multi-method scientific study on the effects of intensive meditative practices. And these practices go way back, over 2,000 years old, from the Eastern tradition, but the study itself was conducted in a Western context, and most of our participants are Westerners. This was the design of the study. In 2007, we randomly assigned participants to one of two experimental groups, a retreat group and a waitlist control group. These are kind of technical sounding things, and I can describe briefly what they are. So this is a schematic that describes the design of the experiment. The retreat group stayed in a residential setting and practiced meditation. The control group, the blue group, living their lives as usual, were flown in on that same residential site and tested alongside retreat groups at the beginning, the middle, and end of the retreat. So we could compare the two. And then these control participants later underwent their own retreat and were tested again at the beginning, middle, and end. There were 30 individuals in each group. Both of the retreats were identical. In each of those retreats, participants meditated for approximately 6 hours a day, ranging from anywhere to 4 to 11 and 12 hours a day. And meditations were taught by Alan Wallace, who I believe was a speaker in one of the previous Its Potential conference. And we also had follow-up assessments at 5 months, 15 months, and now 6 years after this intensive training. And we had a comprehensive assessment of a variety of things, and 20 minutes is not enough time to describe them all. But just to give you a sense of the kinds of things that we measured, we had EEG, so central nervous system activity, autonomic physiology, how the heart functions. We had tasks that were designed, sort of computer-based tasks designed to measure people's attentional capacity, their emotion regulation. We had questionnaires that assess a variety of good things and bad things. We took their blood. We are really evil. And we interviewed them, grilled them, not really, just listened to them carefully and took notes and analyzed those things. This was the training and testing site in the Shambhala Mountain Center in the Colorado Rockies in the United States. Not a bad place to spend 3 months. This is a meditation lodge that we rented for the purposes of the study. And meditation lodges don't normally come with experimental laboratories. So they come with dorm rooms. We saw this dorm room and we had to turn it into a laboratory. So we brought our blueprints of these state-of-the-art EEG laboratories. We brought a lot of building materials, a lot of equipment, and we started building. Lots of man hours, woman hours, opening a lot of boxes. Voila, we have a laboratory. And we can hook up people, and we can monitor them in the control room. We can see what they look like, what they are seeing, and the kinds of measurements that we're taking. And we had an on-site blood lab set up, so we could take their blood, pre-process them before shipping them for analyses. And while scientists were working hard downstairs, participants upstairs in the meditation hall were having all the good time. They were receiving instructions in meditation from Alan Wallace. They met with him twice a day and practiced on their own for the most part. And these were the practices that they received. Again, 20 minutes is not enough time to describe them all in a whole lot of detail, but they can be classified in two broad categories: focusing the mind, and these are practices such as mindfulness of breathing, and this is a meditator crowd, you probably already know what that is, focusing on the flux of mental phenomena as they appear, or awareness of awareness. And these practices are designed to induce relaxation and promote stability and vividness of attention. And they are complemented by other practices that are designed to open the proverbial heart: loving kindness, compassion, empathetic joy, and equanimity. And they are designed to have a balanced attitude and balanced emotional responses, a genuine wish for yourself and others to be happy and free of suffering, and a sense of impartiality. And these were our research questions. Very simply put, what do people do when they meditate? And what do they do differently because they have meditated? They're very simple questions, but we're evil scientists, so we're going to complicate the hell out of them. So we'll ask, in more scientifically tractable, using the tools of modern science, what are the effects of intensive meditation on psychological functioning, stress biomarkers, attention and self-regulation, emotional responses to suffering, and if that's not audacious enough, let's ask, what happens when you give this kind of practice to people? What happens to their worldview? What happens to their goals and priorities in life, their career choices, their relationships, how they face, in some cases, their own terminal illness, their own mortality? What's it like to meditate from the point of view of those who do meditate? In other words, their subjective experiences. So let's start from the beginning. What happens to psychological functioning? Psychologists have a lot of sophisticated measurements, a lot of questionnaires that have been previously validated in other research that we can use. We gave them a battery of questionnaires at the beginning and at the end. A lot of them are good stuff, like mindfulness, psychological well-being, conscientiousness, openness to experiences, and then some not so good stuff, depression, anxiety, neuroticism. We expected the good stuff to go up, the bad stuff to go down. So we had all of these measurements. We statistically flipped the bad stuff, statistically combined it with the good stuff, and came up with one statistical indicator that we called adaptive psychological functioning. Do you feel good when you meditate, was sort of the question. That's it. So this is sort of a more complicated way of asking the same thing. And this is what we found. In the first retreat, the retreat participants showed an increase in the self-reported adaptive psychological functioning, whereas the control participants showed no change. When these control individuals later underwent their own retreat, they too showed an increase in the self-reported adaptive functioning. But they could just be deluding yourself, just like you guys. I'm kidding. How about some hard measures that they can't sort of psych out or fake? All right, well, let's look at stress biomarkers. Let's take their blood. Surely they can't fake stuff, the molecules that are flowing in their blood. Here's a nice picture, and this work is led by efforts by Tanya Jacobs in our lab. This is a very beautiful picture of chromosomes. Our DNA is our blueprint, sort of uniquely defines who we are. And when this DNA is coiled up quite a bit, it sort of looks like this, our chromosomes. The ends of our chromosomes are special. They have a special name, telomeres. And they're special because they help protect the integrity of our DNA whenever the cell divides. Whenever the cell does divide, these telomeres get damaged in the process. They also get damaged when there's a lot of oxidative stress in the biological system, unless there's this special enzyme called telomerase that comes and fixes these ends and prevents this kind of damage or reduces it. There have been studies shown that cardiovascular risk factors or perceived stress in life is related to lower levels of telomerase. If there's a lot of stress, you have less of this enzyme, and it has less of, I guess, the fixing of the ends of chromosomes is reduced. This is related to cellular aging, immune function, and health. Meditation is supposed to reduce your stress. To the extent that it can do that, we would expect meditators, by the end of the retreat, to show higher levels of telomerase. Surely they can't fake that. And that's exactly what we found. At the end of the retreat, you see this bar is higher than this bar, which is the telomerase levels in the control participants. Not only that, the extent to which individuals' self-reported purpose in life increased in the retreat group was associated with their levels of telomerase. Let's move along to attention and self-regulation. And this is work led by Catherine McLean, and I helped a little bit. So imagine being a participant, and you are sitting in that lab, and you see this computer screen with a dot. It's black all around you. You're hooked up with all these electrodes coming out of you, you can't move. You see this dot, and then you see this long line. It's sort of hard to see, but there's a long line here. And it's appearing about 90% of the time. You see the dot, and then you see short line. That's appearing about 10% of the time. So there's a frequently appearing long line and a relatively rare short line. And here's your task. Imagine being evil scientist. Imagine being a participant, you're sort of locked in there, and you have to really focus and look for this long line, and whenever you see the long line, you press a button, keep pressing it, it's coming, 90% of the time, keep pressing it, but when you see the short line, don't press the button. Stop yourself. So, what does this task have anything to do with meditation, you might ask? Because we're evil scientists. If you've meditated, and a lot of people raised their hands earlier, then you know that you sit with the intention of not necessarily following every impulse that arises. You may have to itch your back, you may have this fantastic fantasy, you don't necessarily follow that. So when you meditate for extended periods of time, you get to practice a lot of practice of again and again and again and again of stopping yourself from some impulsive reaction. So this task basically assesses whether that capacity that you're developing on the cushion or wherever can translate into or transfer into this lines things. And the last I checked, nobody has a meditation method based on this sort of long line, short line thing. So can that capacity translate into or generalize into this boring task? But I didn't tell you, not only is it boring, it's actually really hard, because we evil scientists make the distance between the long line and the short line really small. So it's really hard to tell them apart. Not only that, we say to participants, okay, do it, but do it for 32 minutes continuously. Now you get my point? And when you give this task to, let's say, college students or whoever, you see people are sort of, trying hard in the beginning, and they do sort of okay in the beginning, but their performance declines, or the accuracy with which they can stop themselves when they see the short line, declines. There's a classic performance decrement. And the retreat participants might show that too. And that's what we found. This line at the bottom is their accuracy at the beginning of the retreat. They do very well, but 88%, not too bad at the beginning, but it declines over time. But this is, by the middle of the retreat, the entire curve has moved up. Their performance on this task has improved, and this is sort of an average of the whole group. And by the end of the retreat, they stay at that high level. And if this isn't complicated enough for you, I'll put this up. It's a complex mathematical model, and I put it up there only to knock your socks off. And now that you're impressed, you can relax. And I'll tell you why this is important and why this is informative. This model is a mathematical representation of two things changing over time. Thing one and thing two. Remember Dr. Seuss? Thing one, in this case, is people's performance on this lines task, how well they do in it. Thing two is what I described previously as adaptive psychological functioning, the talk stuff, the self-report stuff that they can say in questionnaires. And what this model allows us to test is that people's performance or level of performance on this lines task that's designed to measure self-regulation, how good you are at stopping yourself, can be a reliable predictor of change in their adaptive psychological functioning. So change in performance on the lines task, levels of their performance on the lines task can reliably predict the difference from one time point to the other time point, their adaptive psychological functioning. And importantly, so this happens, we have support for that, the model fits. The other way around doesn't work. So something that changes at this really basic, there's a technical word for it, executive control, that you're using not only your attention, but you also have to stop your motor response, a prepotent response of pressing a button. Something that's so low level and basic seems to be related to, not only related to, but predicting how you feel about yourself. That's kind of neat, cool. But this is still kind of boring, lines task. I mean, who cares? Kind of boring. The meditation, the real juice of meditation is sort of, let's make it lifelike. And what's lifelike? We encounter lots of tough stuff. What about people's emotional reactions to suffering? In this case, we showed people short film clips while their faces were being video recorded. And we got their facial expressions. In this case, this is an example of a film clip from Fahrenheit 9/11. I don't know if you know that film. The clip begins with this happy people in Iraq, and then there's the bombing of Iraq by America, and then you see American soldiers who are saying not so nice things, and then you see suffering of a lot of victims. So these are hard things to see. And we videotape participants' facial expressions, and using this really complicated but really important facial action coding system, we code the movements of the muscles of their faces, and after like a good long days of work, we can look at one frame of a participant and say that's sadness or surprise or something. And the finding is that the retreat participants were more likely to show expressions of sadness compared to control participants when they were shown these films of suffering. And this was at the end of the retreat. There were no differences at the beginning. Not only that, we ask participants, right after they've seen these films, we give them this storyboard that sort of has these snippets of the film that they just saw, and ask them, what were you feeling during these different time points? Ask them to report what their point of view was. And they rate several emotions. And the finding is, then we go and we look at the areas, sections in the clip, where the face was showing sadness. So we have a really objective measure of sadness when you encounter somebody suffering. And this is other people suffering in this case. They see that, what did they think they were feeling during that time? And the finding is, it wasn't sadness. The retreat participants, compared to control participants during those times, reported experiencing empathy, reported experiencing distress, but not sadness. So what is this meaning of sadness on their face? To interpret that, you have to know their own experience, and you have to know that the meaning of this sadness may in fact be other-directed empathy and possibly beginnings of compassion, which is to alleviate other people's suffering. Now, I'm not too bad for time. I'm nearly at the end of my talk, but not once have I defined meditation. How could I do that? So let me fix that. Meditation is often defined as, in Sanskrit, as bhavana, or to cultivate something, cultivate good things, positive, virtuous quality, or in Tibetan, to become familiar with the universe within. I didn't want to leave out the Greeks, but my Greek is not good or non-existent, so I'll just cop out and say the English version, know thyself. And they did also know a thing or two about meditation, I believe. So all of this is sort of telling us that individuals' own experiences are somehow important. Their own experiences of what's it like to meditate each day for so long. What are some of the highs and lows? Why don't we just ask them? And we did exactly that. We conducted these interviews, semi-structured interviews at pre, mid, and post during the retreat, and now we're doing them 6 years later. We have 99 videotaped interviews, and each is about 45 to 90 minutes long. And they were conducted by a participant observer who was embedded in the retreat, yours truly. And we've been analyzing them after about 2 years of analyses of these and reviews. We have about 141 codes that can characterize the kinds of themes that come up. And I'll give you some examples. For example, tolerance commitment to practice, physical discomfort, compassion, non-attachment is sort of a technical Buddhist-sounding word, or letting go, not grasping, not clinging. Other examples, people report a lot of psychological challenges that they experience. They also mention a lot of good stuff, that they experience joy, gratitude, fulfillment, ease of suffering, and things of that nature. And since we're so evil scientists, we found ways of quantifying these really juicy, beautiful things and turning them into really boring numbers. And then we can look at the frequencies with which these themes come, and those are boring numbers, but they're really informative. And we can look at how the frequencies of occurrences of these themes change over time. And we've been doing some of those analyses, and I'll give you a bit of taste of that. So here you see the red line here is frequencies of the theme of letting go coming up at the end of the retreat compared to the blue line. So that it sort of shifts up a little bit and to the right a little bit. And that's an indication, sort of a mathematical model that shows that the frequencies with which the letting go themes come up increase from pre to post. But there were other things, such as a commitment to practice, that showed no change whatsoever in the frequencies with which these things were coming up in people's natural language. When we asked them a very simple question, what's it like to meditate for so many hours each day? We didn't ask them, how committed are you? Or we didn't ask them, how much non-attachment have you been experiencing? It was very open-ended, and they were just speaking in a natural language sort of setting, and we coded those things. But we have about 151 of these. And anyone who's with some statistical training would know that you can't analyze 151 things and not capitalize on chance. So you don't do that. So we've now been using a more sort of global systems approach. Not only that, we don't want to lose sight of the fact that there are some perhaps individual differences in people. I've been presenting data to you that all shows that on average, this is how retreat group is, and compared to the control group, on average. And that was sort of implicit in whatever I described. But I didn't say there's variability. Not everybody changes to the same degree on all the measures that we have. There are individual differences, and it's important to highlight that, and also understand why there are such individual differences. So to get a bit more insight into that, and this is just ongoing work, this is very preliminary, what we did was we took a group of individuals who showed no change on that lines task that I showed you earlier, and another group of individuals who showed a large change on that lines task, who improved quite a bit. So on the left are individuals who didn't improve on that. And this is the network of their codes, themes that come up in their interviews. And what I want to point out is it's somewhat sparse. There are codes all over the place, and their location in this space is somewhat arbitrary. This is just Euclidean space. And on the right side, this is a network of individuals who do change quite a bit. And it seems more complex, more importantly, more integrated. So the point that I wanted to make was that it isn't just meditation is all hunky-dory and all the positive stuff goes up. Some of the negative stuff also goes up, but it's integrated and in the context of all of that. And that may be a very good indicator of growth in meditation. So I'm being told my time is up, so I would like to conclude by acknowledging that this is a small village effort. I'm just merely a voice with a large team of very talented researchers, and also acknowledge the support that we've received from a lot of our funders. Thank you.